Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sharma. This is amazing, and I want to be very kind. It's a very kind offer to talk to all of you here. I know Dr. Manish Kumar Gupta. I don't know if he's there, Professor, and but I have known him for quite long time.
Yeah,
And
he will join soon, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, greetings to all the participants. And I'm looking forward to discussing. And I think, as Dr. Sharma was saying, let's make it more interactive. I would not mind if you guys will ask question in the middle of my talk. I will be happy to answer that. So today's talk is a little different than what you have seen in last few days. You have been seeing many different types of talks, and I think what I have tried, I will try to do it, and I hope I can able to do it in that regard, which I'm thinking about, is to make you aware of what is the future look like in terms of education, in terms of mentoring, in terms of doing research, and how we can train ourselves to be a new generation of scientists. So that's why this topic is very broad, but I think my background is actually mathematics, and so let me talk about my trajectory, my trajectory, professional trajectory. What I meant, I have hold multiple hats in different fields. So, for example, I have been trained as an applied mathematician, but over a period of time, I've worked in harm reduction. So, sociology problem of harm reduction. What does that mean? That means problems of addictions, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, smoking. So, illicit drugs and counterband drugs, for example. So, I worked using mathematical models how to study those aspects. And then I have worked on in my postdoctoral fellowship. I worked on infectious disease epidemiology. I was working for a hospital, um, followed by um, followed by a global health dimension that I have got also in one of my postdoc. So I was working um, in Papua New Guinea, which is an island country in Pacific, and I was there for a few months doing some postdoctoral work. Now you will wonder, applied mathematician going to Papua New Guinea for doing experimental work for lymphatic filariasis. It's a disease called as elephantitis. It's a big legs, basically elephant-like legs. Um, so I was part of the clinical trial there. And then recently, I've also worked in a field called as health economics. And this is quite a novel field where the health and economics intersections and tools coming from those two things are very common in that area. So that's my trajectory of skill set that I've gained. And while working in these very interdisciplinary areas of different fields, I have learned something called as educational participatory democracy. And it's a very heavy loaded work. What that means is actually not telling my own ideas and kind of teaching every time, but learning from students, from participants, from collaborators, from networks. And that is what the word democracy means, participating in a democracy rather than telling what I have learned it. Of course, sharing ideas is a good thing, but also learning from it. And I will show you the example, what exactly I mean as I go forward with it. So from a quantitative perspective, from mathematics perspective, over a period of time, I have, of course, trained as a dynamical system, stochastic processes background, but I've learned a lot of statistics. I've learned a lot of operation research, optimization problems, and then I've learned a lot of social research methods also, which is kind of social science and public health quantitative methods that they are used in the field. Of course, computational approaches are must nowadays, and a public health area, quantitative methods in that. Okay. So, well, today I would touch base with pandemics, and because that has been my major work in the past, but from a modeling perspective. But I want to make you realize, and you all may be aware of this thing, that pandemics is not, this is the first time we are seeing pandemic. There has been many pandemics in the past, maybe not in our life cycle, but or it has been happened, but happened not in all countries, but some countries only. So, for example, 2004 outbreak was barely affected some countries. Ebola, that was in 2015, that barely affected. But there was even milder. H1N1 flu virus is considered to be very, very dangerous virus, but it was happened to be very mild in 2009. But it was a pandemic in the some sense because it covered many countries. And then COVID-19 came in 2019, and by contrast, this was affecting everyone directly and changing the nature of our everyday life. And we learned many things from that. And first thing what we learned is we don't know much, and our tools are not, methods are, or our training are is not appropriate. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so much of problems during the COVID time. But we faced many problems, not only from a health perspective, but from education perspective, from different types of how do we learn, how do we mentor, how do we teach. Every area was affected and affected greatly. So those things makes us feel where are the gaps, what did we not know before, now we know about it. And that is what I'm broadly touching some of the topics on. So this is initial in 2020 timeline from January 7th to June 17th. And there's lots of things happened. There was lots of uncertainty during that time. Various, the news were coming, and we were afraid at that time. We were scared of it. But from a mathematical modeling community, we were learning how to understand this. We didn't have the tools, or we had the tool, but biological or epidemiological information was very limited. Okay. So what we did was we started with a very simple epidemic models. I hope some of you might be aware of epidemic models or have seen it in the previous talk. So simple epidemic SIR type model. Then there was a news of super spreading events in nursing homes, in cruise ships. So we started building in the simple epidemic model super spreading events. So the modeling was changing from very basic to more complex. Then the question started to come of the interventions like lockdown, social distancing, contact tracing, all those things. And therefore, the models started to focus on these aspects, the intervention aspects, and then followed by high mortality. So then we started to realize there's a lot of mortality also. So the models shifted from managing cases to managing mortality. And then finally, on the bottom that you see is limited resources. We started quickly learned that our hospitals are not very trained, not very can handle large amount of patients. And so how do we resource limited situation, how do we handle it? So models were focusing on that. And so there was lots of progression over a period of time that led to this changes in the modeling techniques. And doing these changes in the modeling techniques led to the precision in information. Oops. Okay, so what we realized during that thing that we were unprepared. We were unprepared from the modeling perspective, and the reason we were unprepared is because we were specialist. Most of us were specialist. There are two terminology that is people used in the field are called as specialist and generalist. Specialists are the one who focus in one area, and basically work on that particular area, go deeper into it, right? Whereas generalist is try to understand many different areas and try to link the disciplines together. And so most of us are trained in a traditional way, which is more specialist. And so the science communication was very limited. We didn't know how to talk to the news media. We didn't know how to talk to other people in the area, other fields, disciplines. So so if you see this picture on the right side in the bottom, there is, if you go from pure to applied mathematics, you see the person who's doing lots of bifurcation analysis, theoretical work, to statistical inference, that means linking it to the sum data, but it's still theoretical, to all the way to the participatory science, which is actually working in the field. Even I'm talking about mathematicians and computer scientists. So there was lots of variations that was there, but people were towards more theory than applied, and so they were more specialist than generalist. So this was the realization, first thing. So how is the evolution of ideas over past century has evolved? Well, one example to see is cars. The cars in the 20th century. How do we define the mode of transportation in 20th century? It was this very first car, Mercedes-Benz, which was kind of very rich people, only selected people were having this type of car. I mean, it was very expensive. Only elite were having it in 20th century. And then comes 21st century, and today's definition of freedom of movement has changed. Now every household roughly has a car, but in fact, not only that, in some countries, this is called as a shared car. And basically this transport from your home to the train station or to the major stations. And this is without driverless. These are battery operated, and this is running as a public transportation for many cities, many countries. And it is, what is the benefit of that is, this shared car is using, well, first of all, space is less because it is shared. And then people don't have to worry about parking and those, so on and so forth, right? So this is the benefit of the shared car. So the definition of the transportation has changed from the early 20th century to now 21st century, by the way. Well, in the future, what it is looking like is the same thing, but now you have to use the space wisely because there is more density of the population in the big city. So space needs to be used wisely. So these transportation systems are now on the top. It's like a bus, but you can move it, the top portion, and put it like a truck. And so the same vehicle in the daytime is used as a bus. In the evening, it is used as a transportation vehicle. So the mode of transportation is changing. The definition of the transportation is changing as we going in the future, by the way. So is that happening in the methods also? Yeah, the answer is yes. But do we really changing to that pace as we are changing in real life scenarios? Okay, so let's see what we have been changing. So early 20th century, we use a lot of deterministic equations, differential equations, discrete equations and compartments. We made conceptualize the real life into compartments. And so to track epidemics, for example, not only epidemics, economics problems, finance problems also was done, making real life into small compartments with different meanings and connecting those compartments by equations. That was 20th century, but later 20th century, there was a new method started to come into picture, which we called it as Monte Carlo methods, and they were stochastic in nature. There was a lot of randomness in it. But then as we move in the century, 25th century, the models have changed, the methods have changed. Now people use something called as multi-agent system, which is very complex. In fact, for the COVID, Imperial College London, which is the first one to have models for COVID-19 for the UK government and many other government also. They used agent-based models. That's the best with a huge amount of computational powers. They use agent-based models to capture it. And then the question was, how do we use the huge amount of data in the agent-based model? So that's what the focus of 21st century has been. But going forward, now we need a different type of models. And we are using the models that we will use will know the behavior of the humans. One of the reason we were unable to predict the COVID outbreak is because we were unable to capture behaviors of the people. And that's one of the key reasons. And also multiple scales like regions, time, community, at scales at different levels. I mean, the problems is not anymore a local problems. Also, people are not using single model anymore. They are using collection of models, ensemble of models, by the way, now. Similar to what people have been doing for weather forecasting. You know, all of us have app on our cell phones for predicting weather, by the way. So the reason I wanted to give this thing is that we are changing in the thought process. We are changing in the methods. We are changing in many different ways. Are we still changing in the way we educate ourselves? Are we changing ourselves in the same way as we mentor ourselves, teach ourselves? So are we changing in the same pace? So that's the question I'm trying to put for a discussion today. So I want to give you examples of some new generation of scientists, which I think have changed quite drastically from the past to the future. And some of the examples are here. Simon Levin, he's the first person that in my list. He is a professor at Princeton University in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department. He has got many awards and prizes and awards internationally. He's a collaborator of my work also. And one of the interesting features that is his lab. First of all, his background is mathematics. His degree is in mathematics. But he was a chair of the department in biostatistics in Cornell University for a number of years. And now he's at Princeton University in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department. So from mathematics to biostatistics to ecology and evolutionary. So I'm seeing the transition. So his lab has people from social science, from mathematics, of course, but from ecology and evolutionary biology as well. So many vast disciplines are there working in his lab. So this is what I mean by saying new generation of scientists. Not everyone is doing it, but he's one of the pioneer in the area. Second person that I want to talk about is Nassim Taleb. He is affiliated with New York University Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences. He's a fellow there of mathematical finance. If you search his name, the black swan theory is very popular theory in mathematics, in economics, and finance, that we use it all the time to understand economic problem, finance problem. And it was originated by him actually. But he has been promoting, by the way, he's an advisor of Government of India as well. And many countries he's advising. He's in US, but he advises many countries on entrepreneurship and innovation techniques. So this sounds new to us when we are in academia, but this is very, very important aspect in other discipline like business disciplines or in more applied disciplines. This is must. So why are we doing all these things in our day-to-day teaching and practices? The third person that I want to talk about is Sonam Wangchuk. Some of you might be aware of him. He's a founding director of Student Educational and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, SIMCOL. But I think the reason I have his name that because he is teaching it in a very different way in Ladakh. Ladakh is very resource limited and there's not much of like new methods there, but he has been amazing in building a new methods of education. So for example, he has an institute called as Himalayan Institute of Alternatives. So what he wants to he teaches in that institute is real life aspects. How do you start from real life and solve the problems of real, which is not discipline dependent, by the way. Okay, so he is part of many Indian governments, government of India's committees, educational committee. He has got many prizes, CNN prize, Man of the Year, Times award, the Week award, for example, Raman Magsaysay award. So many different awards he has got. So very famous guy, and you might have heard about him. So those three, I think, are future generation of scientists. Not everyone is doing it, but the people who do something like that will be having leaps and bounds ahead of these scientists, for example. I mean, so what are the challenges today? Well, there are sustainable goals that in 2015, 193 countries all together. This is the first time such goals were formed in 2015. There are like 18 goals, roughly 17, 18 goals. There were no poverty. How do you solve the problem of poverty, for example? I mean, this has been a problem for a long time, but we don't know how to solve it. These are the challenges. And if we are doing the dissertation, if we are doing the research, are we addressing these novel problems, or we are just repeating our work from the past? I mean, the same traditional way. So these are many of these ones in that. I don't want to go into each one of them, but I want to highlight this is a very important set of goals. National Science Foundation in US and National Institute of Health in US have been focusing on these aspects for some time. I also want to highlight the future of medicine and medical technology because I work personally in this area. And so just to tell you, there are two firms, Google and Apple, that you all might have heard of. They are not anymore the technology companies, but they have become now the health companies. They are transforming themselves into the health as well. So there is a change happening in many regards. For example, Wordly is a company of a Google that focuses on health aspects. I don't know how many of you have heard of, but it's a very famous Wordly company. Apple has health sensor, the watch, Apple Watch, or other devices. Even your cell phone has health app that is designed by Apple. So there's lots of transformation that is happening in this area. I want to give you an state of art cancer surveillance and detection, for examples, that has changed quite drastically. Galleria is a blood test that is very sensitive and can now test 15 different types of cancer in advance in early stages. So amazing discovery that has happened. These are the new problems that we have to address. Suppose if my students will be there in working in a mathematical modeling, I usually try to give new problems like these ones. I'm not sure if you have heard about Galleria test, but it's a 50 different types of cancers. It's like a magic pill, magic test, by the way. Now, there is also a CAR cell therapy, the treatment that is coming to train immune cells for the cancer. This is a new therapy, it has not been there, but we have to understand this biology in order to model it, right? For example, so these are very important areas, for example. And also the social media. How do we use the social media? I mean, these big giant tech companies are giving us free of cost Twitter, free of cost Facebook, free of cost many of these social media. What is the benefit for them? And there is lots of benefits because we are giving our information, our way of thinking to them, and that could be used a lot in these models. How do we use that thing? That's a different things, but we have to focus on these as a new problems. For example, there has been 7,000 rare diseases. That is very common. I just tell you there is a disease called as spinal muscular atrophy, and its drug is their Zolexma that is given to babies. Basically, this problem is the muscles are not very developed, and if you give the Zolexma before 2-3 years old, the babies have a better life in the future. But otherwise, they would never able to walk. They will always on the bed, and they will have lots of problem. But this drug costs $2.1 million. So it's a massive amount of. So I think when we are doing the modeling work, when we are deciding on the dissertation or thesis work, are we looking into these problems of real life problems that we can translate? Of course, it is challenging because there's no literature on it, right? But that is a novel part, that is a research part. If we can understand that thing and design it into a mathematical construct. Okay, so there are challenges. Now, I want to just, before I go further into it, I want to ask the audience what is the main disciplines? What are the disciplines that the audience are in today, actually? Is that possible to have interactions? Okay, I see many people on the chat channel. So there are okay. Let's see. I see almost lot of us here. So do I can go further, but I want people to interact. I mean, if they are finding it interesting, this aspects, rather than me giving a lecture on it. I'm coming to the research also in few minutes, but I just wanted to get a feedback if that is making things interesting for everyone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So I hear one yes. So let me go further then. Okay, so challenges in addressing food. What are the challenges we are facing? So since I am from a public health, I work on epidemiological problems quite a lot. I will talk about public health data problems. And of course, the mathematical analysis is afterwards. Once you understand the real life problem, conceptualize it, and then comes the question of how do you use methods, basically. So there's a high uncertainty in the public health surveillance data. It is very slow. The government work very slow. Antiquated technology. Technology is not very new. There is existing gaps in the data center. The sharing is not possible. The one system work in isolation with the other system. So not enough skilled workers also. We don't have the skilled workers of the 21st century. We are training, many of us, the training has been in a very same way as my advisor trained me, for example. And I got trained like 15 years ago. So there has to be some difference in today's training versus the old training, for example. And also inconsistent ways in collecting data. How can the problem data system be fixed? Think about a railroad system. Railroad means railway system. Suppose in India, there are so many states. Each state has its own railway system, suppose. Then there would not be possible to cross the state boundaries. Why? Because some state will have narrow gauge, some will have broader gauge, and how will the tracks will going to combine, right? So we have to have a combined railway system for the nation so that there is a smooth transition of people between states, for example. The public-private partnership has been very limited, and that is what we have observed. We don't have an integration platform. The integration of the social science data versus surveillance, public health surveillance data versus social media data. We don't have those type of versus satellite. We don't have a dashboard to take the data from. We don't know a centralized place. And of course, funding keeps on fluctuating. That has not been, we can't do much in that. But these are the gaps that we are facing currently in it. I work a lot with the data, by the way. So a lot of my students ask me, is the big data the same as the data science? I want to shift from mathematics to data science. That is what their thing is. Well, the data science, what is data science and what is big data? First of all, big data has to do with massive amount of data coming in very fast and different types of data. But data science is not about big data. These are two different fields, big data and data science. Big data may be computational or information systems. People can be skilled in doing that. But data science could be from any discipline, literally. It could be on a small data sets also. So not everything done using big data is necessarily called as data science. There might be an overlap, but that is not true. So what do we mean by data science process? Well, data process is actually many things. It's like obtaining the data, cleaning the data, looking at some patterns and trends in the data, and then modeling it in the future, for example, and then interpreting the results. So these are many, many components that is part of the data science. You don't have to learn everything, but you have to be aware of everything that data science. So when the student comes to me and asks me, I want to go and join computer science department because I want to do data science. My answer is you don't have to change the department. The data science is in the mathematics field as well, right? So, so this is where the ignorance of the ideas are. So this is the same ideas, but I work in something called as forecasting and probabilities. That's the area my area is, but there is quality checking, describing the data, using some statistical methods to talk about missing piece. And then comes the forecasting and modeling, basically. And then, of course, the policy making and understanding, that is the last part. But all these things are different group of people who does these skill set. You cannot have a skill set for everything, basically. So in mathematical modeling, in my group, for example, the students are data scientists, for example, in a practical field, because they can do many of these things there. So I want to also talk about the way we are educating us. So I think there are two groups that I have been affiliated with, and they have been tremendous success. Tremendous success they have been. They run for 25 years or more, and they have been. This one first program is called Mathematical Theoretical Biology Institute. It's a summer program, 2 months program, but it was different program than any other program in the nation, in the US. It got many awards from the president, for examples. And it has led to many research publication in a very good journals by undergraduate students, for example. So, but one of the core essence of this program was something called as flipped hierarchy. And what that mean was that I work in epidemic model, but I didn't give all my students the problems from epidemics. I actually let my students decide what do they want to work on. So think about that. If someone's family member is suffering from something, some disease, they want to work in that area. So I was okay with that. But it is a challenge for me because I'm not in the area. For example, someone's family member is suffering from tuberculosis. Then I don't know the tuberculosis disease a lot. So for me also, it's a learning experience, right? As a faculty. So, but students or participants are very curious to work in that area because the topic, the ideas are originated from the student, him or herself. So that is called as a flipped hierarchy. The only goal as a faculty was to shape that problem in a proper way so that it can become a research project. Okay, the second program that I'm part of is called National Alliance for Doctoral Studies. By the way, the first program was started by Professor Carlos Castillo Chavez in 1996. The second project is called National Alliance for Doctoral Studies in Mathematical Science. It is called Math Alliance also. It was started by Professor Philip Kutsko in 2001. And Philip Kutsko is a professor. He's retired now, but he was a professor at University of Iowa. and now he's a professor at Purdue University. Professor Carlos Castillo Chavez was a professor at Cornell University and then at Arizona State University, and now retired actually. So these are amazing programs, lasted for decades and have done tremendous impact to the society, making undergraduate, even an undergraduate person from other discipline like social science, public health, coming to this and building a mathematical models and publishing papers in well-known journals. So and in Math Alliance, for example, they have they work on special workshops. What is needed in the current job market, for example. They don't work on a typical bifurcation analysis kind of, or computer lab, not like that. They work in a cutting edge problems. They get instructors from industries, from non-government organizations from different countries, and do something like that. So amazing programs. I wish all of us here get an opportunity to do any of these type of programs. I wrote an article for SIAM. It's called Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. And in 2021, actually, in 2 years ago. And here I talked about how do we maintain a collaboration? How do we build a capacity? And I gave an examples from my work in Latin America, in South Asia, in India, for example, and in Europe. I describe some of the key features of this collaborations and how is it being successful, basically. So if you get a chance to read it, it's freely available online. Do get a chance to read it. Okay, so I think I hope I have not lost you up till now, and it has been interesting for you to see some of these things. But also I want to talk about now some of my research. So I'm working on this problem for some years, almost like 7 years. It's on understanding infection through air travel. And basically there is lots of challenges. How do you study and what do you study? What aspects of this is key? And so I'm working with many folks in Florida, in Arizona State, New York University, and other collaborators at Purdue also. But I want to tell that here, our goal is to understand policies in the airplanes. I mean, there's not much literature there, by the way, from a modeling perspective. So in airplane, usually what happens, when do you think that one can get infected? Well, there are a few places. You can get infected while standing in a security line, because your contacts are more likely to happen. Close contacts are more likely to happen there. One can get infected in the restaurant, inside the airport. One can get infected while getting inside the plane, right? Or getting out of the plane, for example. Rest of the places are less likely to happen. Why? Because when the plane is in the air, their ventilation system is very, very good. So it is less likely to have for infection to spread in that. So most of the infection spreads during boarding of the plane and deplaning, coming out of the plane. So we studied those policies and many other policies we studied, but I just wanted to give you a feel of what we were studying. So we had this pedestrian dynamics model, which is capturing. It was an particle system based models where the particle interacts with each other. They have the motion, and then while they are moving in the space, they interact with each other. So that is called as a pedestrian dynamics model. And then that pedestrian dynamics models is using some different types of data. For example, it is using location-based services. Location-based services is like cell phone data, basically. Okay, so cell phone, we use all the apps, and that apps has the data attached to it, which people buy it and use that thing to study the behavior of the people in the airport, for example. We are also using this CCTV cameras at the airports. And then on top of it, we have infection models to study the behavior of infection in the moving population. Okay, so there's many layers of information in this type of models, and the goal was to understand the policies that airports or airlines are implementing. Okay, so and we have to design these models. I mean, there hasn't not been much literature on it, so we have to design it, linking many scales together. Okay, so for example, we studied the same models in the graph that you are seeing. We are studied in the banks, in the city halls. Those are all indoor places like airports, for example, or airplanes. And so similar, or education class in the classroom, for example, or in the movie theaters, in the park. And these ones are in the color coding is from different time periods, and the heights are basically average number of contacts, because contacts are the one which leads to the infection eventually. Okay, so we studied many different types of, because behaviors are different in different locations. And this work has been also in the news for many news, CNN, for examples, and other news agencies. Okay. Second work that I want to talk to you about is on mass killings. There was a recent mass killing in US, very sad situation, but this happens on a regular basis that we hear in the news. So in 2015, we studied this mass shooting. How do we study that one, basically? How do we conceptualize it? There's not much literature on mathematical model, for examples. So our work was actually Through the Wormhole, is a series by Morgan Freeman. And it was, our work research was actually highlighted by Morgan Freeman in the show, basically in 2015. And so in this work, there's a many series of papers that we have. This one paper is in PLOS One, for example. And here, the question that we asked ourselves is, anytime these incident happens, and there is a lots of news occurs after that, lots of news media that highlight these news, is those news media has some effect on the next event to occur. Okay, so that is the question that we were finding. Is there is a contagion effect? If there is an influence that is happening for the next events. So we use that model called as point process Hawkes models, which is basically it's saying that the influence, the vertical axis is the influence by the news media. And so anytime the event happens, it goes up and then exponentially decrease. The influence exponentially decrease over time. And then again, the event happens and it goes up. So it's a set of exponentially decay functions, basically. And that is called as a Hawkes point process. And we use that method to understand the contagion effect of the media, basically. Well, it is a little bit sophisticated behind the scene, but the end of the day, we find that yes, there is a contagion effect, and the contagion means the influence of any news articles or news events that is happening lasts for 13 days after any incidents happens. And it incites, there's a probability of incitement for the next event to happen. Also, we kind of quantified. So very good work. And before this work, there wasn't any idea about this contagion effect in the from the news. News is very important nowadays, and we are all watching it. So there is lots of impact the news is making in our life, by the way. Okay. Next work actually is from pharmaceutical industries, that it's also a model behind the scenes that we are working, and we are using here decision tree models. And here the goal was, during the COVID times, lot of tests were coming, tests for diagnosing the COVID infection. So the question, there was new test by some company that we were working with here in US, pharmaceutical company, and they wanted to ask, they come out with a rapid test. Rapid test is like few minutes, 30 minutes it takes to identify whether you have infection or not for the COVID. But this test is rapid, so that's a good thing. But the bad thing is these rapid tests have not very good results. Sometimes they fail, basically. So the question was that this company wanted to ask is, what is the economic value? What is the value of this rapid test as compared to PCR test, which is much better? It takes a lot of time. PCR test takes a lot of time, like 2-3 days. It was taking in those days, 2-3 days, but it was very accurate. PCR test. PCR test is a polymerase chain reaction testing, which is commonly used in the lab. So these were two tests: rapid molecular test and PCR testing. PCR takes a lot of time but more accurate, and rapid molecular test is very fast but less accurate. So the question was that a company wanted to know is, which one is a better test in a long run? Okay, so we studied these things using decision tree mathematical models, basically behind the scenes. But the question was that the cost. Think about the cost. Here, the cost, you need to quantify the cost, and not only quantify but also build it in the model. That's a difficult task. So, well, the cost associated with the rapid molecular test. Suppose if the rapid test detected wrong, a test. The cost associated, of course, wrong detection, there is no financial cost other than the test cost, which is very cheap test. The cost is this person who wrongly identified is now going in the community and spreading infection, secondary cases. And therefore, the cost is the treatment and all the extra things for the secondary people now. So there was huge amount of cost if you miss one person, if you wrongly detect one person. Okay, so there was lots of different types of cost, as you are seeing in this thing: societal cost, direct cost, indirect cost, cost to an individual, cost to the healthcare facility. Because if you are infected, you are taking treatment of some sort. I mean, even though the treatment for COVID is not available, but the treatment for cold and cough is available. So you take that one, for example, to soothe your symptoms, right? So there are lots of tasks. You don't go to the work. The cost is you are losing the work. So that's the cost also. So how do you take all these different types of cost, bring it together in a dynamic model, in mathematical model, which is capturing the case trend, how the cases are spreading in the population? So we found that the rapid molecular test is very good. It saves a lot of money. It's as compared to PCR test, provided, it's not always, but provided PCR test is taking more than 2 days. If PCR test is taking less than 2 days, then PCR is better. But if it is more than, then point of rapid molecular test is better. So this was the idea of this work. I hope you have got the feel of it. Okay, so what should we focus on going forward? What do you mean by new generation of researchers should know this skill set? Well, so I published this paper in 2021, and here we talked about some of these things. We talk about multi-resolution modeling approach. Traditionally, we don't think this way. And basically, the idea is we should be trained as a mathematician or as a computer scientist. We should be trained also in empirical science. Empirical science means, how do we collect the data? How do we carry out something called as Delphi methods? How do we carry out systematic review? Right? These are very important aspects nowadays. And in some scenarios, we are trained on a surface on these things. Okay, and then what type of models one should be talking about it? And our training is talking about only pieces of informations or complete story. That means implementation, policy decisions. Are the models also talking about how do we explain our results to someone in public health department, for example? So how do we do that? Basically, these skills are different skills. It's not a traditional way of giving the skill set, by the way. It's a good paper by the, and so, well, in my area, we do a lot of called as bifurcation analysis, and we do disease dynamics quite a lot. But I think it is very key. Just looking at the disease dynamics is not sufficient for us to make it a complete researcher in today's market. In the future jobs, we need to do something more than just learning the disease dynamics. We want to learn how do we take care of the cost associated with something that we are modeling in the disease. Economic aspects associated. Without cost, anything we say from the models makes no sense, because that is what we've seen in the COVID times. If it is some population were not taking these interventions because they cannot afford to do it. So there has to be understanding of the economic cost on top of the disease dynamics. Behavior aspects, how do you have to understand the acceptance. We talked about many policy from mathematical models, but those policy people will never accept it. So what is that understanding of the population for acceptance of those policies? That has to do with the behavior aspects also. That is very important, and the modeling is different type of modeling in this area, by the way. And then psychological implications. Psychological implication, being a human, we have to understand not only, COVID has created a lot of psychological problems. We are sitting at home, a lot of social mixing were happening less, but then also the new methods that we are coming out with is causing people more anxious now from there. So these all four pillars are key. And that we have to link it to the policy and decision making. We are trained only in some aspects of it, but we need a training components in all these dimensions, and that is where is a key thing. So, well, I'm not a skill in everything, but I collaborate in my research lab with other people in other disciplines. That helps me completing the story for my students, for example. One very important point I want to make here is something complexity related. How much of complexity we need to talk about it. So I want to talk about Enrico Fermi here. Many of you know about it. He's a physicist, well-known physicist. And he worked on Manhattan Project during World War II. Developing Manhattan is a New York downtown basically area. If you would have given interview in the top companies like, for example, Google, they ask you a question. For example, they ask you, what is the weight of Qutub Minar in India? Or what is the weight of any building? It's an arbitrary question, but the idea there is for you not to answer correctly or not correctly, but to see your thought process in it, right? So Fermi came out with this problem, and it's called as a Fermi problem, is a thinking process basically to looking at that. So he came out with a simple ideas of approximating many what is the weight of New York, many of the buildings in the New York, for example. And he made quite a, it seems like an impossible answer. So can you tell what is the weight of the Qutub Minar, for example, in India, or weight of a Taj Mahal in India? Well, you have to count and weight every brick of the Taj Mahal in order, or every marble of the Taj Mahal in order to make sense of the weight, right? But you can make a logical guess on that. And the logical guess is you have to divide the problem into small chunks of manageable problems, and then make certain assumptions to come out with a logical general knowledge answer. For example, if we are interested in the weight of the Taj Mahal, we have to find it out how many floors are there. So approximately, let's say there are 3 floors of it. That's an assumption I have made, right? So there are 3 floors. Each floors have let's say 6 feet height, right? And I'm making up this thing. Again, I'm not making a point of making an accurate answer, but making a point to get a reasonable estimate of it. So it's a 6 feet high, and each 6 feet height has 4 walls, and each wall has certain number of layers of, let's say 10 layers of bricks or marbles, and we can find out the weight of each marble, and then you multiply that thing in a very simple way. You will be able to eventually find out what is an estimate of the weight of a Taj Mahal. Okay, so he was very famous for it, and it is called as Fermi problems, by the way. And he has been very well known for this process. So this is the process, the way we have to think of the reason. Many of the times we failed. For example, in COVID, we failed to predict the future, because we were thinking with a very conceptual, very complicated ways, whereas that information was not even available in the field. From the data was not even available. So we have to start thinking small, and we have to start building from these Fermi problems some of the estimates. Another point that I want to make is this NSF survey. They do it all the time. And they wanted to look at non-traditional career versus traditional academic career. What that means is how many, so they look at many PhD holders after they graduate, and they looked at the data from 2000 to 2008, and they followed these students. And they followed over next 9-10 years, and they wanted to see where are they going. Are they going all in academia, or they are going in which discipline they are going? So that what they found as a result is most of the STEM discipline, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the majority of them are going in the in a non-traditional disciplines. That means they are not going in academia. Okay, if majority of them are not going in it, but we are training them as a postdoc, and followed by the way they will do very good in academia, then there is some problem in our training, right? So in fact, what they found is only 29%, for example, went on to become a faculty or in academia. Only 29%. Rest were in elsewhere, and everyone many of those ones did a postdoctoral position, as if we are training them for academic career. So are we training everyone in the same way, for example, right? And is that a right way of training? And I'm just putting an open question here. But this is very, very important for us to how we are training, what we are thinking for them to become in the future, and are they getting the right tools and techniques? So I want to stop here, and because I have other slides also which I can continue further, but I want to see if there is any questions from the audience, and I want to keep this picture on the left side. Is when we talk about academic life, do we really know as a students what does it mean? And this picture describes what the academic life means. It is lots of component, lots of things we do, and this picture describe it very well in that. So yeah, I wanted to give something different from the thinking, the way we have been thinking in the past versus the way we need to think in the future. So I want to discuss few more slides here. So you can see it, right? My slides?
Yes.
So there's a school campus that we model, and we model to see how is there's a campus in US, and the campus is there's lots of alcohol drinking problem. So we wanted to study the dynamics of alcohol in that college population, and we studied using something called as multi-agent models that I was talking to you about before. So we wanted to capture these things, many places like food courts where students eat, common areas like libraries and student centers, sports events, And we wanted to alcohol outlets. Alcohol on campus is not allowed, but people come to the school and they talk to each other, and they talk about, let's go in the evening and have drinks. So if the school is not there, I mean, the university, they are not coming to university, they are not mixing. And if they are not mixing, the alcohol problem will not be there. At least that much will not be there. But people usually drink alcohol in the social events, for example. So this is the model that we built. And this left side, bottom left, is a caricature of the campus, basically, and how students are changing. So, and we did the survey. We had to do the survey. So left side, what you see is a survey design. So I think we designed certain question to answer behavior of the students. And we distributed these surveys. And we asked the students to fill up this survey. And we get parameters through that survey. So now, the reason I wanted to mention this thing is because this is not a traditional way of mathematician getting trained, right? But students in my lab, for example, get a chance to do the surveys as well as doing the mathematics after the data was collected. Okay, so this is one example that I want to do. Also, one thing that I want to talk about is outbreak data. So, why did we not able to, why there was so many deaths from the COVID? Why? We ask this question all the time. And the question that come down to, because we did not have the data. If we don't have the data, we don't have a magic wand that we will know exactly what is going on, right? So there is different sets of data that we use. For example, case data, like surveillance data from public health department, background data from census, let's say from how many population is there, what is the age structure of it. So that is a background information that comes from the census data. Census data is good, but case data is not very good. Surveillance data is not very good. Okay, and then comes the intervention data. That means if we apply the some kind, let's say if we are applying vaccination, how many people we are vaccinating every day? That's the vaccine coverage, right? So we need to know that coverage. If there is no centralized place where this data is available, we cannot do any policy understanding for the vaccination, for example. So these data were missing at the time of COVID and still missing. There's no central place where all the data gets, I mean, there are some data available at the central place, but not all the data that we need to understand how the outbreak look like. Still, we don't have it. And the system is very slow in processing the data. This is what we are realizing in US. So now in US, there are centers, the US government is making centers to just make the data library. Just like libraries of the book you have, now there will be a library for the data. And there will be not one-time data, but a continuous gathering of data that they will collect there. But it is not yet there, but it will be there in future. That is what people are thinking about. So other issues that not only the surveillance data was not there, but the definition of the information was not clear. For example, when do you define cases? When it has certain symptoms, or when a person is in the bed, a person is in ICU. When do you decide which is the case of the infection? So lots of problems is there. Other issue is the scalability versus accuracy. If I want to model something at the global level, and it is very important to model at the global, there is no country boundaries anymore because people are moving from everywhere to everywhere. So if we make it at a global level, how accurate we should be in one location? That's the question that we are asking. We don't have an answer to that, right? In vaccine efficacy, we didn't know efficacy. Different strains were coming, and the vaccine has different efficacy against the different strain, Omicron strain or Delta strain, for example. So lots of things were unknown, actually. And that resulted in, and still unknown, actually. We are learning it. So the question comes, how much complexity we should build in the model? Okay, that's the question. So this graph is a very important aspect. So this is saying, if you increase the model complexity, the performance will do a good job, but you will add identifiability. What does that mean? Is uncertainty. Now you have more parameters, you will need more data for it, and if you are wrong in any one of the data, your prediction will be wrong in that sense. So there is a trade-off: complexity versus accuracy. So nowadays, actually, since we realize the data is a challenge, so we are using alternative data now. How are we using alternative data? We are using satellite imagery. We are using credit card system, right? So economic system we are using. We are using website scraping, for example. So we are using alternative data. Now the question is, if you use this alternative data, how do you translate into knowledge? How do you translate into something that is useful for your problem? So if we are looking at a health problem, how do you understand that thing? So that is a challenge that we are facing, but we are in the process of using many of these things, and we are learning as we are using it. And so we have to be trained in handling these alternative data. If we are not trained in handling these data, then no matter how good is in the mathematical analysis, the industry will not need us. Today's industries, these are the common things in the industry. Okay. And remember, most of the students are graduating and going to the non-academic pipeline. That's very, very important point that I made. So there are lots of alternative data that needs more focused understanding. Actually, I'm more technical in here, so I don't want to go more technical. Let's see. Okay. So I think this is the last slide that I want to present, and this is coming from a pharmaceutical industry, and I made this file to make sense out of it. So there's a term called as product. In academia, we never talk about product. And in industry or in non-government organization or semi-industry, there's always a product, always a product. And once you have the product, then you start thinking in a very different way. You don't, for example, if you have a treatment, if you have a drug, the drug can have a benefit in a patient, right? But that benefit has no meaning if the amount of money is very large for that. So like Zolexma, that I gave an example, is costing $2.1 million for one dose, which is a massive amount of money for one dose, right? So the question is the benefit that you are getting from having that drug versus the cost. There is a trade-off it. I mean, if there is a person is very poor, that person will never going to take $2.1 million drugs. It's not possible for that person, no matter it is life or death situation for it. So there's a trade-off there. There's a trade-off. Do we study? Do we give this time of understanding to our students nowadays? That's the question there. So this curve is showing. This is a graph that companies use it. The organization, even university use it at a higher level. The university use it is based on the cost, how much cost I'm putting, and how much cost I'm getting, how much revenue I'm getting from selling my product. For example, in university, the cost is electricity, internet, these are the cost, right? And the revenue is tuition fees for the university, right? So the product is tuition, product is education, right here. So there's a trade-off there, right? And so the question is the new courses that we bring in the education, we have to bring early on. The faster we bring to the early on, the better it is to the society, right? But while bringing the product, new education, you need to well, think about it in a different sense. If you bring it faster, you have to make sure that it is good product. It is good a course you are bringing to the life. You just don't want to bring any course. It will be not useful, even though you will bring it early on. So there's always a trade-off. So there's a dotted curve and there's a continuous curve. And that difference is the value of the product. Okay. And this is what we do it all the time over a period of time until it becomes generic in nature. So you see the word generic. Drug become generic means common use of drugs. It's the same thing. Courses also is generic courses. In academia, the courses are generic. It becomes routine course. Those are not beneficial if it is not novel course, right? So after a while, its value decreases, basically. Okay. So this is what is very important thinking to bring the thinking in everyone's researcher's mind for understanding the future problems. So I will stop here and thank you very much for having me. And it is lovely to talk with all of you guys. And Dr. Sharma, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anuj. I have one quick question to you.
Sure.
Like, okay, as a mathematician, I am happy to work with any differential equation. Okay, while I working, like now, when I want to go to model some problem, for an example, you have model a problem like entering into aircraft, and with some with having in the mind that okay, some infection can happen through that. So what are your ideas to decide the parameters there is with which differential equation you want to go with, and something you can have we can have a quick comment on that maybe.
Sure. This is a good question. So how do we decide the model? The model is decided by what is available in the field, what data is available in the field. So, and also the knowledge of the literature. If we do not know what is the literature that we are having in the area, then it is very difficult to bring down to, we have a hammer and we are using the same hammer everywhere, right? It's not so, but there are so many tools. We have to go outside our comfort zone. Economics has models, social science has models, right? But we never have a time to go to social science and look for the models for how do you people behave to each other at the airport, for example.
Yeah.
So those are the things we need to do and go out of our comfort zone to read those literature and see what would make sense in that scenarios and what data is available in that field, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Participants, is there any other questions? Please, you are free to ask.
Yeah, I will charge it later. Hello, Manish ji, kaise hain? How are you?
Hello, I am fine. How are you?
Doing very well. Wonderful to see you.
Yeah, so you are at home or in the office? Oh, at home, I guess.
It's home, yeah.
Okay, it's night time.
Yeah. Everything going okay at your end?
Yeah, everything is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I have
The
one
question-
question.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Sir, COVID-19 comes in our life. After that, we aware about importance of medical field. So after that, some biological engineering started somewhere. So I want to comment. I want to know about comments on the scope of in future about biological engineering and role of mathematics in that field.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And you are, what's your name?
Dheeraj.
Dheeraj. Can you tell me what is your background, Dheeraj?
I am mathematical background and working on stochastic pi calculus is like modeling, mathematical modeling.
Wonderful. So Dheeraj, really good question. So what is the future look like in biomedical sciences, for example? Well, the question we have to ask to ourselves, does it really matter to us? I think what is important here is what is you are passionate about. Something that you are passionate about, can you do a modeling work in that area? If you are in a mathematics department, for example, can you do a mathematical modeling work on the things that application that you are passionate about? Now, that's a very difficult question. Suppose if I'm interested in, there is some problem in my family, in like there is someone suffering with cancer. I want to look at the cancer problem, but I don't know the cancer problem. So I have to go and read the literature of the cancer first, right? So it's not about what would be the top topic, but I think what would be the way of thinking to the problem is very key there, right? Health, biology will always be there. There's no way you can get rid of problems, biological science problems, right? Before COVID also health problems were there. I mean, we were not aware of it because we never went into that field. We never talked to anyone in the pharmaceutical company, or we never went to talk to anyone in the clinical field. So we don't know, right? But these things have been there for decades. I mean, for centuries. Yeah, Dheeraj, is that answer partly your question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. Sir, my question is, how one mathematician can motivated in this modeling area? My area is purely mathematics. Like after MSc Mathematics, I'm doing PhD. So, as a pure mathematician, how we can motivate it in this modeling area?
A really good question. So how do you choose method? That's your question, if I'm understanding it correctly, right?
Yes, yes.
So there's usually what happens is I'm trained in one area and I use that method all the time, but that's not the right way. I think what I see like is the right way is to, for example, I gave you a cancer problem. So for cancer problems, you need to go and look in the literature of the cancer, right? And see what aspects of cancer we want to study. And there are lots of mathematical work, and they are not using, not all these papers are using dynamical system, for example. They are using graph theory. They are using optimization problem. They are using stochastic programming problems, right? Methods. They're using different types of methods. It depends on what your research question is and the literature to guide that research question for the method, for example. But you will be very uncomfortable in this new method area because it's not what you are trained in. If you are willing to do that legwork of learning about this new method, you should be doing that thing.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yep.
Sir, to solving some model, some mathematical model, so there is different approach. You just told us. So, means which approach will be more better for a model? How can you understand?
You know, this is what I'm saying. There's no formula for it. Nobody can, if someone is giving the formula that this approach works all the time, that's incorrect formula. I will not believe that. The problem, the method depends always on a research question. What is the research question? So in some problems, I use agent-based model because individual aspects was very important, right? In some problems, I don't care about individual, it's a population level effect. So I use the population. In other problems, I needed to optimize something. So in that case, I use optimization methods, for example. So the research question guides you what method to use. So I ask my students to do a lot of literature review in the application area first and decide on the research question. And then, for example, if I want to work in the cancer area, I want the students to read the cancer papers, not mathematical papers, but the cancer papers. And then come out with the questions that are with my consultation, that this is the question is appropriate. Okay, applied questions that has nothing to do with the mathematics. And that applied question then decides the method to use, which method to use. Okay. So if it is individual level characteristic I'm interested, I will use multi-agent system or network theory or something else than like these ones. If it is a population level aspects, that is then dynamical system, stochastic differential equation, and so on and so forth.
Sir, also multi-skill modeling is also very much beautiful to apply in this field.
Absolutely.
So can you say something about that?
Multi-scale problem might be helpful, but depends on if you want the scales to come together. Why do you want to, if your research question is on one single scale, why do you care about multi-scale method, right? Just for learning that method, that's a different thing. But using it in applied problems or resolving then applied problems makes only sense when you have scales, you want to combine scales, or you want to take information from one scale and translate it to the other scale, right? And then if that is the research question you have in mind, yes, you should go ahead and learn about it and apply it.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Okay. So thanks, Dr. Anuj Mobai. It was a wonderful talk, inspiring talk for the students. They will like it. So I hope they have learned. So they have noted down your email address. So they will contact you for further information. So thank you
Sure.
very much. Yeah.
Sure, it's my pleasure, and wonderful to see you and everyone else, Dr. Sharma also, and thank you for having me and talking with all the participants.
Yeah, sure. See you sometime soon.